The splash was deafening. Karen's scream pierced the summer air as 80 pounds of muscle and fur crashed into the crystal blue water beside her designer float. But this wasn't just about a dog ruining her perfect tan, it was about the secret she'd been hiding in my backyard for 3 weeks. The lies that were about to surface, and the moment my sweet neighbor's mask finally slipped, what happened next would shatter our quiet suburban street forever. Because sometimes the real monsters don't have 4 legs and floppy. The first thing Sarah Martinez noticed when she pulled into her driveway was the smell of expensive sunscreen and entitlement wafting over her 6-foot privacy fence. She'd been working double shifts at the hospital for 3 weeks straight, her scrubs still damp with sweat and disinfectant, and all she wanted was to collapse on her couch with a cold beer and let Buster, her rescue pitbull, burn off energy in their backyard. But Karen Whitfield had other plans. Sarah could hear the rhythmic splash of someone doing laps in her pool, the one she'd saved for 2 years to install, working overtime and skipping vacations to afford. The same pool Karen had been borrowing while Sarah pulled consecutive shifts, thinking she was being clever about it. "Come on, boy," Sarah whispered to Buster, whose tail was already wagging at the prospect of his afternoon swim. The Pitbull had been rescued from a fighting ring, but his only aggression now was toward tennis balls and pool noodles. "Let's see what our neighbor's been up to." Sarah pushed through her back gate, and there she was, Karen Whitfield, 45 years old and looking like she'd stepped out of a Real Housewives casting call, floating on a $200 designer raft in the middle of Sarah's pool. Her platinum blonde hair was swept up in a perfect top knot, designer sunglasses perched on her nose, and she was wearing a white bikini that probably cost more than Sarah's car payment. "Karen," Sarah's voice cut through the afternoon air like a scalpel. Karen's head snapped up, and for just a moment, Sarah caught something in her expression, not surprise, but calculation. Like she'd been expecting this confrontation and had already planned her response. "Oh, Sarah, you're home early." Karen's voice dripped with false sweetness as she slowly paddled toward the edge. "I hope you don't mind, the heat was just unbearable. And you mentioned once that I could use the pool any time." "I mentioned no such thing." Sarah set down her work bag with deliberate calm. Buster pressed against her leg, sensing the tension. "In fact, I'm pretty sure I've never given you permission to be in my backyard at all." Karen's laugh was like wind chimes in a hurricane, artificially pleasant and completely out of place. "Oh, you must have forgotten. You were so busy with work, and I offered to keep an eye on things while you were gone. You know how Brykins have been lately." Sarah felt her blood pressure spike. She'd been working herself to exhaustion, covering for colleagues, pulling double shifts to make ends meet, and this woman had been treating her backyard like a personal resort. But it was the lie that really got to her, the casual, practiced way Karen twisted the truth, as if Sarah were too stupid or too tired to remember her own conversations. "Get out of my pool, Karen. Now, there's no need to be hostile." Karen remained floating, her voice taking on that patronizing tone Sarah had heard her use with store clerks and waitresses. "I was just trying to be neighborly. You work so much. I thought you'd appreciate someone keeping the pool clean and maintained." Sarah walked to the pool's edge, and Buster followed, his nose twitching with excitement at the sight of water. "You mean used? By you? Without permission?" Karen finally began moving toward the shallow end, but she took her time, as if Sarah were being unreasonable for wanting her own property back. "I don't understand why you're being so aggressive about this. It's not like you were using it, because I was working. To pay for this house, this pool, this life that you seem to think you're entitled to share. There's no need to raise your voice." Karen stood up in the shallow end, water cascading off her surgically enhanced figure. "I'm a grown woman, not one of your hospital patients." The comparison hit Sarah like a physical blow. She thought of Mrs. Chen, who'd died in her arms 3 days ago after fighting pneumonia for weeks. She thought of the teenager who'd come in with overdose symptoms, and the young mother who'd been beaten by her boyfriend. She thought of all the real problems, the life and death situations she dealt with every day, while this woman had been lounging in her pool without a care in the world. "You're right," Sarah said quietly. "My patients have dignity." Karen's mask slipped for just a second, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Then she was back to playing the victim, her voice taking on a wounded tone that Sarah had heard her use during neighborhood disputes. "I don't know what's gotten into you, Sarah. This isn't like you at all. Maybe you should consider therapy for all this workplace stress." Buster whined and pressed closer to Sarah's leg. The dog had an uncanny ability to read tension, and Sarah could feel his muscles coiling beneath his short coat. He wasn't aggressive, never had been, but he was protective, and he could sense his human's distress. "The only thing getting into me is the realization that I've been too polite," Sarah said. "Get out of my pool. Get off my property, and don't come back." Karen waded toward the steps with exaggerated slowness, every movement calculated to show that she wasn't being rushed. "You know, Sarah, I've tried to be understanding about your situation, working all those hours, living alone with just that dog for company, but this hostility is really concerning." The way she said dog made Sarah's hands clench into fists. She'd heard that tone before, usually accompanied by whispered conversations about dangerous breeds and property values. My situation? What exactly is concerning about my situation? Karen? Well, you're clearly under a lot of stress. Working all the time? No social life? No boyfriend? Karen stepped onto the pool deck, water pooling around her feet. And then there's the matter of your pet. I've done some research, and pit bulls have a very high aggression rate. The Homeowners Association has actually been discussing breed restrictions. Sarah felt the world narrow to a single point of rage. The Homeowners Association Karen had been trying to get herself elected to for 3 years. The same association meeting Sarah missed because she was working to save people's lives. Is that what this is about? You want Buster gone? I want the neighborhood to be safe? Karen reached for a designer towel that she'd apparently brought from her own house, another violation of Sarah's space that she'd only now noticed. Dogs like that are unpredictable. One day they're fine, the next day they're attacking children. Buster's tail stopped wagging. He was still pressed against Sarah's leg, but now his ears were forward, alert. He might not understand the words, but he understood tone, and he could sense the threat in Karen's voice. Buster has never hurt anyone in his life. Yet Karen wrapped the towel around herself with theatrical precision. But statistics don't lie, Sarah, and neither do insurance companies. Did you know that your homeowner's insurance rates could go up significantly if the HOA classifies certain breeds as high risk? The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The casual mentions of dog attacks in recent neighborhood newsletters, the sudden interest in HOA meetings from residents who'd never cared before, the way Karen had been asking subtle questions about Buster's behavior, his training, his bite strength. This wasn't about the pool at all. This was about getting rid of Buster. You've been planning this, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Karen's smile was sharp as a blade. I've been protecting my investment. Do you have any idea what a dog attack does to property values? What it does to the safety of a neighborhood? Buster has never yet, Karen repeated. But it's only a matter of time. Dogs like that always turn. It's in their nature. Sarah looked down at Buster, who was now sitting at attention, his dark eyes moving between the two women. His tail gave a tentative wag when he caught her looking, and she saw nothing but love and loyalty in his expression. This dog who'd been trained to fight and had chosen gentleness instead? This dog, who slept at the foot of her bed and brought her his favorite toy when she cried? This dog, who was more family to her than the relatives who'd stopped calling years ago? Get off my property, Sarah said, her voice deadly calm. I'm going. Karen gathered her things with deliberate slowness. But this conversation isn't over, Sarah. The HOA meeting is next Tuesday, and I think the other homeowners deserve to know what kind of liability they're living next to. She paused at the gate, turning back with a smile that was all predator. Oh, and Sarah? You might want to invest in a better lock for this gate. You never know who might wander in while you're at work. The threat was clear, and Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. Karen wasn't just planning to get Buster banned from the neighborhood, she was planning to set him up. A mysterious break-in, a startled intruder, an unprovoked attack, that would be all the evidence the HOA needed. Sarah watched Karen's perfectly manicured figure disappear through the gate, her designer flip-flop slapping against the concrete. With each step, the afternoon sun beat down on the pool's surface, creating ripples of light that danced and shifted like Sarah's understanding of her end. The first sign that Karen's retaliation had begun came at 6:47 a.m. the next morning, when Sarah's doorbell rang with the aggressive persistence of someone who had no intention of being ignored. She stumbled to the front door in her scrubs, coffee mug in hand, expecting to see her elderly neighbor Mr. Peterson with another complaint about his newspaper delivery. Instead, she found Officer Janet Mills on her doorstep, looking distinctly uncomfortable in her crisp uniform. Morning, Sarah. Sorry to bother you so early, but I got a call about a noise complaint. Apparently your dog was barking all night and keeping the neighbors awake. Sarah blinked, her sleep-deprived brain struggling to process this information. Buster. He slept in my bedroom all night. He doesn't bark unless she's stopped. Understanding flooding through her like ice water. Who called it in? Janet's expression told her everything she needed to know. Look, I know this is probably bull, but I have to follow up on every complaint. Department policy? Of course you do. Sarah stepped back to let Janet inside. But you like to see the dangerous dog in question. He's currently passed out on my bed, snoring loud enough to wake the dead. They walked through the house to Sarah's bedroom, where Buster was indeed sprawled across 3/4 of the queen-sized bed, his massive head buried under a pillow and his legs twitching as he chased dream rabbits. At the sound of voices, he opened one sleepy eye, assessed the situation as non-threatening, and promptly went back to snoring. Terrifying, Janet said dryly. Absolutely menacing. Karen Whitfield called this in, didn't she? Janet sighed. I can't officially confirm that, but let's just say this is the third complaint I've gotten from your street this week. All about the same dog. All from the same concerned citizen who seems to have very strong opinions about breed-specific legislation. Sarah felt her stomach drop. 3 complaints. Aggressive behavior toward joggers on Monday. Menacing children at the bus stop on Wednesday. And now excessive barking. Janet pulled out a small notebook. Thing is, I jog past your house every morning at 5 a.m., and I've never seen your dog outside without you. And Mrs. Chen from across the street called me yesterday to say that Buster helped her find her escaped cat last week. Apparently he herded it back to her porch, and then sat there wagging his tail until she came outside. She's building a case, Sarah realized. Filing false reports to create a paper trail. That's what I'm thinking too. But here's the problem. Each complaint has to be investigated and documented, even if they're obviously fabricated. And if there are enough complaints, Janet trailed off. But Sarah understood. The HOA can use them as evidence that he's a public nuisance. Or the city can classify him as a dangerous animal. 3 strikes, and he could be removed from the home. Sarah sank onto the edge of the bed, unconsciously reaching out to stroke Buster's fur. He leaned into her touch without waking up, and she felt her heart clench with protective fury. What can I do? Document everything. Get cameras if you can. Afford them. In Sarah Janet's voice dropped to a whisper. Be very, very careful. I've seen cases like this before, and they don't usually end with just paperwork. The ominous warning followed Sarah to work, where she spent her 12-hour shift distracted and jumpy, checking her phone every few minutes for alerts from the security app she'd hastily downloaded during her lunch break. She'd installed a basic camera system that morning. Using her emergency credit card to buy equipment she couldn't really afford, it was worth every penny when she got home at 8 p.m. and found the footage from 2:30 that afternoon. Karen stood at Sarah's back gate, not trying to hide her presence, but not exactly announcing it either. She had a small paper bag in her hand and was reaching through the gaps in the fence, dropping something into Sarah's yard while looking around nervously. Sarah fast-forwarded through the rest of the footage, watching Karen repeat this performance at 3:15, 4:45, and 6:20. Each time, she dropped something from the bag, then quickly walked away. What the hell is she doing? Sarah muttered, pulling on her shoes to investigate. She found the answer scattered across her backyard. Pieces of raw hamburger meat, some of them studded with what looked like small white pills. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She pulled out her phone and called Janet Mills directly. Janet, it's Sarah Martinez. I need you to come over right now. Karen's trying to poison my dog. 30 minutes later, Janet was carefully collecting evidence, while Sarah held a trembling Buster inside the house. The meat samples would go to the lab, but Janet's field test kit had already detected traces of what appeared to be sleeping medication. She's escalating fast, Janet said grimly. This goes way beyond harassment. We're talking attempted animal cruelty, possibly attempted murder, if the dosage was high enough. Can you arrest her? I can bring her in for questioning, but she probably claims she was trying to feed a stray cat or something equally innocent. The camera footage helps, but a good lawyer could argue that she didn't know it was your yard, that she was just being neighborly. Janet shook her head in frustration. People like Karen know exactly how to walk the line between legal and illegal. As if summoned by her name, Karen's voice drifted over the fence. She was in her backyard, apparently on the phone, and her voice carried clearly in the evening air. I don't know what else to do, Margaret. That dog is becoming increasingly aggressive, and I'm genuinely afraid for the safety of my grandchildren when they visit. Sarah and Janet exchanged glances. Karen didn't have grandchildren. Yes, I've tried talking to Sarah, but she's in complete denial. You know how some people get about their pets, they can't see the danger even when it's right in front of them. She knows we're listening, Janet whispered. Karen's voice grew louder, more theatrical. I just pray nothing happens before the HOA meeting on Tuesday. If that animal attacks someone, the liability will be enormous. Not just for Sarah, but for the entire neighborhood. Janet motioned for Sarah to stay quiet as they continued listening. Of course I've been documenting everything. Photos, videos, incident reports. I even have testimony from several neighbors about aggressive encounters. Mrs. Henderson from Pine Street was nearly knocked down just yesterday when that beast lunged at her while she was walking her little Pomeranian. Sarah started to speak, but Janet held up a warning hand. I know. Everyone says pit bulls can be sweet, but statistics don't lie, and once they turn fast. Poor Sarah is going to be devastated when something finally happens, but at least we'll have protected the children in our community. The one-sided conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Karen painting an increasingly dramatic picture of Buster as a ticking time bomb and herself as the neighborhood's brave protector. It was a masterclass in manipulation, designed to be overheard and repeated to anyone who would listen. When Karen finally went inside, Janet turned to Sarah with a grim expression. She's not just trying to get rid of Buster anymore. She's setting up a narrative where something inevitably happens to him, and she comes out looking like a hero who tried to prevent a tragedy. What kind of something? Janet was quiet for a long moment, studying the scattered pieces of poisoned meat. In my experience, she's planning to stage an attack, make it look like Buster hurt someone, probably herself, and use it as justification for having him put down. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd hurt herself just to frame my dog. People have done worse for less. And Karen strikes me as someone who's very invested in being right, no matter what it costs. Janet began packing up her evidence kit. Sarah, I'm going to be honest with you. The law is on Karen's side here, at least until she does something blatantly illegal that I can prove in court. Filing false reports, trespassing, even attempted poisoning. She's smart enough to make all of it look like misunderstandings or accidents. So what am I supposed to do? Just wait for her to hurt my dog? No, you fight back, but you do it smart. Janet handed Sarah a business card. That's my cousin's number. She's a lawyer who specializes in neighbor disputes and HOA issues. Call her tonight. After Janet left, Sarah sat in her living room with Buster's massive head in her lap, trying to process the day's events. 24 hours ago, her biggest problem had been finding time to clean her pool. Now she was dealing with a neighbor who was actively trying to destroy her dog's life and possibly end it. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check your front yard. Sarah's blood chilled. She grabbed a flashlight and crept to her front window, peering through the blinds. At first she didn't see anything unusual. Then the beam of her flashlight caught something white stuck to her mailbox. She debated calling Janet back, but something told her this was meant to be found by her alone. Against her better judgment, she slipped outside and walked to the curb. The paper was a printout of a news article from 3 years ago. Pitbull mauls child in local park. Someone had used a yellow highlighter to mark certain phrases. Unprovoked. Attack. Extensive injuries. Owner claims dog was gentle. An animal destroyed by court order. At the bottom, someone had written in neat cursive, history repeats itself. Sarah's hands shook as she stared at the paper. This wasn't just a threat anymore, it was a promise. Karen wasn't planning to have Buster removed from the neighborhood. She was planning to have him killed. Sarah's bare feet hit the cold kitchen tiles as she raced to the back door. Buster close behind her, his ears alert to the tension radiating from his human. Security camera's motion alert had jolted her from a restless sleep, and now her heart hammered against her ribs as she peered through the glass into her moonlit backyard. The pool's surface was disturbed, ripples catching the underwater lights in an erratic dance. But it was what floated in the deep end that made Sarah's blood freeze. A child's pink backpack bobbed near the diving board, its cartoon unicorn pattern clearly visible even in the dim light. Beside it, a small sneaker drifted like evidence of something unspeakable. No, Sarah whispered, her breath fogging the glass. No, no, no. She fumbled for her phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers while her mind raced through the implications. Karen had planted evidence of a child in distress, evidence that would implicate Buster the moment police arrived, and found him in the same yard as what appeared to be the aftermath of an attack. 911. What's your emergency? This is Sarah Martinez at 2847 Maple Street. Someone has broken into my backyard and planted evidence to frame my dog for attacking a child. I need police immediately, but please tell them this is a setup, ma'am. Slow down. Are you saying there's been an attack involving a child? Sarah closed her eyes, realizing how insane she sounded. No, there's no child. Someone planted a backpack and shoe in my pool to make it look like ma'am. I'm dispatching units to your location. Please stay on the line. The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone in horror, understanding that Karen had anticipated this exact scenario. When police arrived and found Sarah claiming the evidence was planted, it would sound like the desperate lies of a dog owner in denial. Buster whined and pressed against her leg. Sensing her distress, Sarah looked down at his trusting brown eyes and felt her world collapse. In less than 10 minutes, police would arrive to find what appeared to be evidence of a child attack in her backyard. Karen would emerge as the concerned neighbor who'd been trying to warn everyone about the dangerous dog next door, and Buster would be removed from the home immediately, probably destroyed before Sarah could even get a lawyer on the phone, unless she could prove this was a setup. Sarah's mind raced as she pulled on shoes and a jacket. She had maybe 8 minutes before sirens announced the end of everything she cared about. 8 minutes to gather evidence that would save Buster's life. She grabbed her phone and started recording as she stepped into the backyard, narrating what she was seeing. The pool equipment shed's door hung open, something that had been locked when she'd gone to bed. Muddy footprints led from the fence to the pool's edge, footprints too small to belong to an adult man and too large to belong to a child. The intruder accessed my yard through the shed, Sarah said to her phone's camera, following the trail. They knew exactly where to find the pool equipment, which suggests her voice died as she spotted something else. Caught on the fence's top rail was a small piece of fabric, white with a pattern she recognized. It was the same material as the designer shirt Karen had been wearing yesterday when Sarah had seen her checking her mail. Sarah carefully photographed the fabric without touching it, then moved to the pool's edge. The backpack and shoe were positioned too perfectly, floating exactly where they'd be most visible from the house. No child would have gone into a pool wearing only one shoe, and the backpack showed no signs of having been submerged, floating because it was empty. Placed carefully on the surface, but it was what she found next that made her gasp aloud. Hidden behind her pool equipment, still damp from being used to plant the evidence, was a long-handled pool net. The same net that had been stolen from her shed 3 weeks ago, right around the time Karen had started her campaign of harassment. Sarah photographed everything, her hands shaking with adrenaline and fury. Karen had been planning this for weeks, stealing the tools she'd need to plant evidence, timing everything perfectly for maximum impact. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Sarah had maybe 2 minutes left. She ran back to the house and grabbed Buster's leash, clipping it to his collar with fingers that refused to work properly. If the police were going to take him, she wouldn't let them think he was running loose and dangerous. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, though her voice shook with tears. "It's going to be okay." But Buster sensed her fear and began to tremble. His massive body pressed against her legs as the sirens grew deafeningly loud. The first police car pulled into her driveway as Sarah was walking Buster to the front yard, wanting to meet the officers before they could form their own conclusions about what they'd find and back. She recognized Officer Mills getting out of the passenger seat, along with the older officer she didn't know. "Sarah," Janet said carefully, her voice professional but her eyes concerned. "We got a report about a possible attack." "It's a setup," Sarah said quickly. "Someone broke into my backyard and planted evidence to frame Buster. I have video footage, photos, everything you need to." "Ma'am, I need you to secure your animal and step away from him," the older officer interrupted, his hand resting on his weapon. "We have reports of a child's belongings found in your pool." "There's no child." Sarah's voice climbed toward hysteria. "Karen Whitfield has been harassing me for weeks, filing false reports, trying to get Buster banned from the neighborhood. This is just her latest." "Sarah," Janet's voice cut through her panic, "I need you to calm down and let us investigate. Can you put the dog in the house?" Sarah looked between the two officers, seeing skepticism in their faces. Despite Janet's familiarity with the situation, she was a woman alone in the middle of the night, claiming her dog was being framed by a neighbor who'd apparently predicted this exact scenario. "If I put him in the house, you'll search my backyard and find exactly what Karen wants you to find," Sarah said desperately. "Please, just look at my security footage first. Look at the evidence I've documented, ma'am. We need to secure the scene," the older officer said firmly. "That means containing any potential threats until we can determine what happened." Potential threats. They were talking about Buster like he was a loaded weapon instead of the gentle soul who was currently trying to hide behind her legs. "Fine," Sarah said, her voice breaking, "but I want it on record that I've been documenting Karen Whitfield's harassment for days. I have photos, videos, witness statements, everything you need to prove this is a setup." She led Buster to the house, her heart breaking as she saw his confused expression. He didn't understand why the humans were tense, why his beloved person was crying, why strangers with loud voices were invading his territory. "Stay here, buddy," Sarah whispered, closing the door between them. "I'll be right back." But as she watched the officers head toward her backyard, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, Sarah wasn't sure she'd ever see Buster again. Karen had orchestrated this perfectly, the timing, the evidence, even the 911 call that would make Sarah sound like a delusional pet owner. The older officer's voice carried clearly in the night air. "Jesus Christ. Janet, look at this." Sarah's knees went weak. They'd found the backpack and shoe, exactly as Karen had intended. In the officers' minds, they were looking at evidence of a child attack, not an elaborate frame job. "Sir, I think you need to see this," Janet called back. "There are footprints here that don't match the homeowner or a child." Hope flickered in Sarah's chest. Janet was doing her job, investigating rather than jumping to conclusions. "And there's fabric caught on the fence," Janet continued. "Recent, by the look of it, someone definitely climbed over tonight." The older officer's response was muffled, but Sarah caught the skeptical tone. He was humoring Janet, going through the motions of a thorough investigation, while his mind was already made up. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from the unknown number. "Enjoying the show. Don't worry, it'll be over soon." Rage replaced fear. In Sarah's chest, Karen was watching this unfold, probably from her bedroom window, savoring every moment of Sarah's anguish. She'd spent weeks building to this moment, the perfect crime that would destroy Buster while making her look like a hero. But Karen had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated exactly how far Sarah would go to protect someone she loved. Sarah pulled up her security app and began uploading footage to a cloud storage account, sending copies to Rebecca Torres and every contact in her phone. If Karen thought this would end with Buster's removal, she was about to learn otherwise. "Ma'am." The older officer's voice came from behind her. Sarah turned to find both officers standing in her living room, their expressions grim. "We've secured the scene and called for a crime scene unit," he continued. "But I have to ask, where were you and your dog between midnight and 3 a.m.? "Asleep in my bedroom. Buster sleeps on the bed with me. He has since the day I adopted him." Sarah's voice was steady now, fueled by determination rather than panic. "Check the security footage. It'll show exactly when the intruder entered my yard and planted that evidence." Janet stepped forward. "Sarah, I believe you that this is a setup, but the evidence we found, it's going to raise questions. A child's backpack, a shoe, what appears to be blood on the pool deck." "Blood." Sarah's voice cracked. "There's blood." The officers exchanged glances. Dark stains that could be blood. The soft whine from inside the house cut through the heated conversation like a knife. Sarah's head snapped toward the sound. her heart stopping as she realized what she was hearing: Buster's distress call, the one he only made when something was seriously wrong. "Buster," Sarah called, taking a step toward her front door. The whine came again, higher and more urgent, followed by the sound of claws scrabbling against hardwood floors. Not the playful scrambling of a dog wanting attention, but the frantic scratching of an animal in panic. "Something's wrong," Sarah said, breaking away from the group. "Ma'am, you need to stay here while we," Officer Davidson began. But Sarah was already running toward her house. She burst through the front door to find her living room empty, the back door standing wide open. Cold night air poured through the opening, and Sarah's blood turned to ice as she realized what had happened. "Buster," she screamed, racing toward the backyard. She found him 20 feet from the house, backed against her garden shed with his hackles raised and his teeth bared, not in aggression, but in pure terror. Standing between Buster and the house was a figure in dark clothing, moving with deliberate menace toward the cornered dog. But it wasn't Karen. "Marcus," Sarah gasped, recognizing the man from 3 doors down. The quiet widower who'd always seemed harmless, who'd lived in the neighborhood for as long as anyone could remember. Marcus Henley turned toward her voice, and Sarah saw something in his eyes that made her soul recoil. It was the look of someone who'd crossed a line so far behind him that he could no longer see it. "Stay back, Sarah," he said, his voice eerily calm. "This needs to happen." In his right hand was a metal pipe, raised and ready to strike. In his left was a small device that Sarah recognized with horror: a cattle prod, the kind used to subdue large animals. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Sarah stepped closer, her hands raised in a placating gesture. "Put those down. Buster's not going to hurt anyone." "He already has," Marcus said, taking another step toward the terrified dog. "Attacked a little girl tonight. I saw it myself. Poor thing didn't stand a chance." Sarah's mind raced. Marcus was repeating Karen's fabricated story, as if he'd witnessed it personally. Either he was delusional, or Karen put you up to this, Sarah realized. "She told you to kill my dog." Marcus's expression didn't change. "Karen's been trying to protect this neighborhood for years. Someone had to listen to her eventually." Behind Sarah, she could hear the others' approaching footsteps pounding across her lawn, voices shouting commands, but they were too far away, and Marcus was too close to Buster. "Marcus, listen to me," Sarah said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "There was no little girl. Karen planted evidence in my pool to frame Buster. You're about to kill an innocent animal based on lies." "I saw the blood," Marcus replied, raising the cattle prod. "I saw the backpack. Planted evidence." Sarah took another step forward, even though every instinct screamed at her to run. "Karen broke into my yard and staged everything. She's been using you, Marcus, using your grief to turn you into her weapon." For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across Marcus's face. "My Martha always said pit bulls were dangerous. Martha was wrong." Sarah's voice cracked with desperation. "Just like Karen's wrong. Buster has never hurt anyone in his life." Behind Marcus, Buster pressed himself lower against the shed, his eyes fixed on the cattle prod with the kind of recognition that broke Sarah's heart. He knew what those devices were, for he'd been tortured with them in the fighting ring where she'd found him. "Marcus, please," Sarah whispered. "Look at him. Really look at him. Does that look like a killer to you?" Marcus glanced down at Buster, who was now trembling so violently that his tags were rattling. The dog's eyes were wide with terror, but there was no aggression in his posture, only the desperate hope that this nightmare would end. "He's scared," Marcus said, sounding confused. "Of course he's scared. Someone broke into his home, and now a stranger is threatening him with torture devices." Sarah's voice rose to a shout. "Marcus, you're better than this. You're not a killer. Everyone freeze. Drop your weapons." Officer Davidson's voice boomed across the backyard, and Sarah heard the distinctive sound of multiple weapons being drawn. The cavalry had arrived, but whether they were there to save Buster or to finish what Marcus had started remained to be seen. Marcus spun toward the officers, the cattle prod still in his hand. "You don't understand. This animal attacked a child. Karen saw it happen." "Sir, drop the weapon and step away from the dog," Davidson commanded. "I'm protecting the neighborhood." Marcus's voice climbed toward hysteria. Someone had to do something before more children got hurt. Sarah saw her chance. While Marcus was distracted by the officers, she lunged forward and threw herself between him and Buster, her arms spread wide to shield her dog. "If you want to hurt him, you'll have to go through me," she said, her voice deadly calm. Marcus stared at her in shock. "Sarah, move. You don't understand what you're protecting." "I understand perfectly. I'm protecting a gentle soul from people who've been poisoned by lies and prejudice." Sarah felt Buster press against her back, his massive body shaking but trusting her to keep him safe. "And I'm not moving." "Ma'am, step away from the animal," Davidson ordered. "Let us handle this situation." "No." Sarah's voice rang with absolute conviction. "I won't let anyone hurt him based on fabricated evidence and neighborhood gossip. If you want to take my dog, you'll have to arrest me first." Janet Mills appeared at the edge of the confrontation, her weapon drawn but pointed at the ground. "Marcus, put down the cattle prod. Nobody needs to get hurt here. Tell that to the little girl who got mauled." Marcus swung the device toward Janet, his movements becoming increasingly erratic. Where is she? Where's the victim? Everyone's so concerned about protecting. What little girl? Janet asked carefully. The one Karen saw. The one this monster attacked. Marcus gestured wildly at Buster, who whimpered and tried to make himself smaller behind Sarah. Marcus, Janet said gently, there is no little girl. We've checked the hospitals, contacted child services, reviewed all the security footage. No child was attacked tonight. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His face went through a series of emotions: confusion, denial, and finally a dawning horror as he realized what he'd almost done. But Karen said, she showed me the blood, the backpack, ... His voice trailed off as understanding crashed over him. Planted evidence? Janet confirmed. We're dealing with an elaborate hoax designed to frame an innocent animal. The cattle prod slipped from Marcus's numb fingers, hitting the ground with a metallic clang. He stared at Sarah and Buster with growing shame, the full weight of his actions settling on his shoulders. Oh God, he whispered. What have I done? Sarah slowly turned to face him, keeping one hand on Buster's head. You let someone else's hatred turn you into something you're not. But you can still make this right. How? Marcus's voice was broken. I almost killed an innocent animal. I almost became a monster. By telling the truth, Rebecca Torres said, stepping into the circle of light cast by the officers' flashlights, by testifying about how Karen manipulated you into this situation. Marcus looked up at the lawyer with desperate hope. She said the dog had already attacked. Said someone needed to put it down before it killed again. She made it sound like I'd be a hero. How long has she been talking to you about this? Rebecca asked. Weeks. Ever since my Martha died, she's been coming by, bringing casseroles, talking about neighborhood safety. Marcus's voice grew stronger as he spoke. She said pit bulls were time bombs, that it was only a matter of time before something terrible happened. When she called tonight and said the attack had finally occurred, you believed her because you trusted her, Sarah finished. Because she positioned herself as someone who cared about the community. Marcus nodded miserably. She said you'd deny everything, that dog owners always did. She said the police might not act fast enough, that someone had to protect the children. Officer Davidson lowered his weapon. Sir, you're saying Ms. Whitfield specifically asked you to harm this animal? She said it needed to be put down, that it was too dangerous to wait for official channels. Marcus looked directly at Buster, who was still pressed against Sarah's legs. God, look at him. He's terrified. What kind of monster was I about to become? The kind Karen Whitfield creates, Rebecca said grimly. Marcus, I need you to repeat everything you just said in an official statement, every conversation, every manipulation, every lie she told you. But as Marcus began nodding his agreement, a new voice cut through the night air, one filled with rage and desperation. Enough. Everyone turned to see Karen storming across the backyard, her bathrobe billowing behind her like the wings of an avenging angel, but there was nothing angelic about her expression. It was the face of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing around her. Marcus, you incompetent fool, she snarled. I gave you one simple job. The admission hung in the night air like a confession written in fire. Every officer present had heard her essentially admit to orchestrating the entire plot. Ma'am, you need to stop talking, Davidson warned, but Karen was beyond reason now. Do you have any idea how long I've been working on this? How perfectly? I had everything arranged. She gestured wildly at the assembled group. 1D